Hey, everybody. Voting, participation, lobbying groups. In addition to this class, Political Science 151, I spend most of my time teaching the KSS, which hopefully most of you have heard of, and all of you will have to deal with at some point. I think it's a pretty good class, although I won't get into the details of it. I bring that up so that I can bring up a guy named Robert Putnam, who, when you take the KSS, you'll encounter in week 1. He has a particular theory, a particular model of citizenship engagement. So his argument goes thusly. Over the course of time, American engagement, civic, political, all of it has dropped. We used to get together and do stuff together as citizens of a society. We just don't do it anymore the same way for a host of reasons. Changing social dynamics, changing economic dynamics, a whole host of reasons. But the point is, we're not doing it like we used to. And that lack of engagement leads to a drop in trust. And that drop in trust leads to a lack of social capital, what he describes as the networks and norms of how society works together and operates to find compromise and achieve goals. Social lubricant, not quite like alcohol. The social capital is really important to a society like the United States, and participation is how you get it. Voting is a part of that, but it's not the only way. Putnam's big concern is that as engagement drops, participation drops, trust amongst all of us drop, social capital drops. There's another impact. Our lack of trust extends upward to institutions, medicine, politics, policing, take your pick, CIA, Supreme Court, all of it. We don't trust much of anything anymore. And I imagine a lot of you are shaking your head at maybe one or a few of those things going, yeah, I don't know about them anymore. Fair enough. You're not alone. This is a huge problem. It's a problem, and we need to find a way around it. And that's what Putnam's research is directed at. How do we get back to that level of engagement to develop trust, to develop social capital, so that we can show people there is an incentive to political participation? Because if you don't want to participate politically, there are people that will. In fact, this is one of the problems with the primary process. Think about it like this. If you vote in primaries, you are an outlier. Most people don't vote in primaries. Political activists, political extremists, not violent necessarily, but people that are hardline party affiliates of the Democrats or the Republicans are primary voters. And in that process, in the primary voting process, what you end up with is the most Democrat and the most Republican. And then those individuals have to moderate their perspectives to come to the middle to try to beat the 51% in any given election. This is not healthy. I would pitch to you that ranked choice voting is a better option. But we'll leave that aside for now. The point is, regular voters, like most of us are moderates on the left or the right, we need to show up with our majority numbers and vote to cancel out those extremists on either end of the spectrum. That's one thing to consider. Importantly, aside of that, our system is designed for us to participate, right? Because there are always going to be representatives, and those representatives are always going to be responding to and answering to a particular group of voters. If only the extremists are the ones voting, then that's who the legislators are responsible to. So if you want to know what the hell's going on with our legislators and why does everything seem so crazy, look who's elected them and look who's not voting. It's part of the same story. So it's really critical that we do this. It's really critical that we be informed about a number of complicated issues and have a nuanced understanding of complicated issues so that we can vote on those things, especially when we hear our legislators making this or that crazy claim. You say, nope, this one sounds crazy. They don't know what they're talking about. Nope, that one sounds crazy. They don't know what they're talking about. It's incumbent upon us to be able to call those, well, strikes and fouls, whatever you want to say it. We need to be the arbiters, not them. And when we give up that responsibility, this is what we're given. This is what this is what ends up happening. Not all societies demand that their citizen base votes. Many societies don't want you to vote at all. In fact, it's preferable if you just sit this one out. We'll take care of this. That's not the society that the United States happens to be. We need citizens to vote, to participate, so that we can tell our elected officials what they ought to be doing. Now, our elected officials can go in a couple different directions, right? They can do what we tell them to do, or they can do what they think is in our best interest. Hard to tell which politician you're going to get. It's not immediately obvious. But as our book says, we know that that's at least, those are two elements of how our legislators can operate on our behalf. That's how the republic works. Here's the other big part I think that's relevant, and many of you showed some decent amount of concern for from the video, is, well, no, first, let's before I move on to the video, I'm going to finish this element of who votes, because this is a decent part of the chapter, and it'll be relevant to your upcoming essay questions in your midterm. Who votes? The statistics are pretty clear. The data is pretty evident. Wealthy, educated people who are older consistently vote. So if you are not in lockstep with the desires, the needs, and the interests of older, wealthy, educated people, then your ass needs to get to the voting booth, and you probably need to get more people that share your sentiments and go vote. Because, again, older, wealthy people, and particularly white, don't forget that. So older, wealthy, educated white people tend to vote the most and most consistently. Things changed under Trump a little bit. He did activate a non-standard voter base. That being said, greater participation is requisite for legitimacy. If you've got an entire category of voters, a demographic group based on age or identity, ethnicity, take your pick, if they're not showing up to the polls to vote, their interests are not going to be reflected. And then invariably, they run the risk of having policy contrary to their right interests. And that's not good, generally speaking. And the further away we get from the average political voter participating, we get our extremes being more represented in government. So I can't stress that any more than I already have. Normal people need to go vote to moderate the system, basically. And they need to know what they're voting on. Okay, now on to lobbying groups. This builds on to the previous concept. We influence the government by voting, and the people that represent us, the legislators and the senators, right, pursue what is hopefully our interests, either because they think it's in our best interest or because we explicitly say, no, this is what we put you in power to do. You do it because we said you should do it, and not because you think it's in our interest. No, do what we told you. You have those two different options. But there's other interests trying to get the government to do what they want. These are different lobbying groups. There's a whole different host of how lobbying groups can manifest and what their interests are, right? So the group of us from PS 151, we can come together as a lobbying group. We can try to get the government to do something. At the local level, it's pretty easy. We can go to our city council and we can get 1,000 signatures or something to get on a ballot for a local initiative, or we can pressure them to do something specifically, right? There are different ways we can affect the governing process at the local level much differently and more directly than we can at the federal level. But if we were all to try to get together and affect what one of our senators from Nebraska, or one of our District 2 or District 1 or District 3, right, Nebraska congressmen would do, that's much harder, especially when you've got professional interest groups and corporate interest groups with a hell of a lot more money and structural and organizational power. Makes it's just, the deck is not stacked in the average person's favor. Well, and so here's a little more detail. As a corporate or a professional lobbying group, you have money and power, and you have likely direct access to actual legislators and senators. And you can get a hold of them, not when they're voting on the floor for a bill to pass or fail to go to the president. You can get them at the committee level where they're discussing what ideas will even go to the floor to be voted on. That's power. Us average individuals do not have that. So there's no good way to balance the disproportionate power in certain lobbying groups from concepts that come from average voting public at the grassroots. It would take millions of Americans being focused, unified, goal-oriented, and active to counter the power of some large corporate or professional lobby group. It's very hard to do. It's very hard to sustain. So it's not a pretty story to tell, I suppose. That's a challenge that we face as a society, and I don't think it's going anywhere. And if any of you remember the Citizens United case from several years ago, 2010 maybe, the Supreme Court decided, listen, if you can spend money as a form of political speech, then a group of people can spend money for political speech. And that's where you get super PACs. Is it good? Is more money in a political system healthy? Probably not. But God, there's a lot of money in it. There's a lot of people that benefit, a lot of people that profit. And turning that one back is going to be substantially difficult. And it's going to require some, big act of Congress and the Senate together to put constraints and restrictions on that. And I don't know if I see that happening anytime soon. So there are things we can't fix, things we can't do anything about in the short term, but we can all get out and vote and participate in all the different ways that the book suggests. This is important. There's these stats on page 125 that you can vote. You can contact your representatives. You can get involved in an organization. You can protest. I'm not big on protesting, but maybe some of you are. Campaigning for certain politicians or other types of contribution. These are all different forms of political participation. And as you see on this chart, as you go down that list from voting all the way to contributing to campaigns, the disparity, the percentage in difference between the different income groups gets bigger and bigger and bigger, showing what is, a clear enough story and a clear enough connection. More money means more power in politics. And so be aware and don't give up too much of your power, because if you don't go vote, someone will vote for you. Not in the illegal sense, like somebody's going to vote in your place. If you leave a power vacuum in politics, it will be filled by others. That's what I mean. All right. Take it easy.